My son has been asking me to build him a bed for a few months now, and a recent injury has really pushed that need to the forefront on the project list. So today, let's build a bed with a lofty outlook on Timber Biscuit. So today, I'm going to be building my son a loft bed. And the reason I'm building this bed now is because my son broke his collarbone on the first day of summer, which, as injuries for kids go, might be the worst day to break a bone. But the way he broke it was falling out of a bed. And I want to make him something that will A, give him a lot more space for his room, and B, make him feel a little bit more confident that he's not going to fall out in the future. This way he doesn't have to go back to that angry doctor. I mean, when I was there, I asked the pediatrician why he was always losing his temper, and he said it was because he had little patience. Anyway, so to build a sturdy bed, I got to start out with some sturdy materials. So for this project, I'm going to be using some 8/4 and some 4/4 hard maple. Now, hard maple is notoriously hard on your tools, but its strength will make for a great bed. So what you see me doing here is roughing out the beams that are going to create my bed's frame. Because these pieces are so thick, I like to cut them over at my bandsaw first. This way I don't have to worry about any of the internal pressure grabbing onto the table saw blade, which with my experience tends to happen pretty frequently with maple. Now, before I get too far ahead of myself, let's take a quick look at the design. So my design has 5 thick legs that are going to support the majority of the weight of the bed. And under the bed will live a small desk, and of course the top of the bed will have some nice high safety rails. Now, all the openings and rails for this design are within the limits for what a loft bed should have, so again, no more visits to the ER. That stuff's expensive. Alright, so getting back to the build, the next step was to go ahead and joint that edge that we just ripped down over at the bandsaw. Now, what I like about doing thick pieces this way is that I feel like I can really dial in their thickness. Because what I'm going to do is joint these edges and then take my sticks over to the planer and then plane them down to their final thickness. So I don't have to worry about ripping these boards down at all at the table saw. From there I can take my work pieces back over to the bench and then trim them down to their rough length. Now I like doing this with the jigsaw, again because there's a lot of internal pressure inside the lumber, and doing this with a miter saw is A, a lot more work, and B, a lot more dangerous. So jigsaw for the win. And I say more dangerous because at this point, the edges of these boards are still rough, which means there's not a square reference point for the miter saw. And by trimming these down to their rough length now, before I joint those edges, makes them a little bit less difficult to joint because jointing 8-foot long lumber is a pain in the butt. So next I take my trimmed down tree slices over to the joiner and put that clean edge on them. Now a couple of these boards are still like 85 inches at this point, so it's no walk in the park at the joiner by any means. Like when I tried to come up with a carpentry pun that would work. I think I nailed it, but no one saw it. Alright, so the next step on the to-do list was to rip down all of my parts. And at this point, I'm aiming for all my parts to be about a 32nd of an inch oversized, or about a millimeter oversized for my international viewers. I know mathematically that doesn't add up, but ballpark it. And the reason I'm not trying to nail my size here is because my ripping blade is going to leave some saw marks on my boards, and I'm going to need to clean those up with my hand tools later on. So we got to leave a little meat on the bone. It's normally at this point that I'll say something like, I don't like to follow a cut list because I like to get my actual dimensions off my workpiece. And that's true. And I'm going to do the same thing here, which is why I left all of my pieces slightly oversized. This way there's a little wiggle room in there in case I need to adjust something. But just as we've discussed before, this isn't an ideal world and things aren't always perfect. And since I'm referencing the plan here, let me know if you guys want plans for this project down in the comments, and if there's enough interest, I'll put them together. Just know building your own can cause injury, like getting a splinter, or as I call them, my timber tattoos. But regardless of what you call them, whenever you're doing work like this, it's dusty. From there, the next step was to go ahead and chop all these pieces down to their final length. And to do that, I'm just going to install a crosscut blade over at the table saw and use my miter gauge to trim down those smaller pieces. What I like about using a miter gauge for smaller parts is that I can use a fence to align my pieces and a stop to make sure that I dial all those pieces in. But because it's a bed frame, there's obviously going to be some pieces that don't quite fit on the miter gauge. And for those pieces, I'll just use my crosscut sled. So right off the bat, the pieces are too long to use a stop block on my sled. So what I like to do is just use some double-sided tape to stick a stop block to the top of my table saw. This will give me a nice reference for all of these parts so that they're all the same length. Even if this is off slightly, at least all my parts will be off exactly the same. So it's kind of a moot point. The one thing you do have to be careful of is that you don't knock into the block too hard and knock loose that double stick tape. But as long as you're kind to it, it'll generally be kind back. Like when I recently visited that restaurant called Karma. There was no menu, you just get what you deserve. So for the extra long pieces, I had to get a little bit more creative. And for those, I just created a stop block using my workbench, a clamp, and a piece of scrap. Sometimes in the shop, you just gotta get a little resourceful. And I feel like this one would make MacGyver proud. And hey, if you're enjoying these creative tips, make sure you leave a like. I really appreciate your support. So I just used that setup to trim down those rear safety rails as well as my 2 sides for the mattress supports. And then from there I can just nudge the bench over and trim down the legs to their final length. Now if these legs were any thicker, I'd probably have to cut them down with something like a track saw, but thankfully placed on their side, the crosscut sled has plenty of height to be able to cut through them. Either way, with this much blade exposed, you really need to pay attention. So with that last cut, all the work pieces that I can cut down to their final length are. And I took a quick moment to organize all my parts and make sure they were checked off the list. I think we're doing all right. But it's not really about what I think, so I bring the client in to get his opinion too. And after being given the all clear, I moved on to the next step. And that was to carve out my safety rail vertical supports. So to create those, I'm just going to trace out my template onto all 6 of my work pieces. And I need 6 because I'll have these safety rails on the head, foot, and outside portion of the bed. So with all 6 parts marked out, I could bring the pieces over to my bandsaw and trim them out to their rough shape. Now here what I'm aiming for is to stay about a 1/16 of an inch outside my line. We obviously don't want to cut into the line because that'll be cutting into our workpiece. So with curves of this diameter, I like to use a blade that's a 1/4 inch. If they were tighter curves, I might go to something that's 1/8 of an inch, but that thin of a blade becomes less utility, so I tend to keep less of those on hand. So with all my pieces roughed out, I could head over to the router table and install my flush trim bit. Now this is a combination up-down flush trim bit, and I really love using it whenever I have to route end grain. Because it's a combination up-down bit, I tend to not get as much tear out from end grain as I would from something like a straight bit. Now as I've said in the past, that doesn't guarantee there's going to be no tear out on end grain, it's just less likely to occur. Like the guy who invented zero. Thanks for nothing. And if you want to check this bit out and get one for yourself, I'll leave a link to it down in the description. And on this day, we did make it through our entire set without getting any tear out at all. Thank you, woodworking gods. So because my initial workpiece was completely square, it's easy enough to just trim off those ends to create a nice square joint for our safety rails. Whenever you can use a table saw to cut joints like this, I think it's highly recommended to do so because you're guaranteed some solid results, even if it means a little extra shop cleanup. So the next step was to go ahead and lay out my joinery for the rails. And to do that, I'm just going to use a double square. Here I'm just marking out the center of the boards, or about the center of the boards on all my work pieces. Whenever I'm laying out joints like this, I like to keep my reference point from the same part of the project. So if I'm measuring from the top of the rail down, I do from the top of the rail down on all my work pieces. This way if that mark is off center at all, it would be incorrect on all my parts, meaning that all the work pieces here would be lined up. So for the joinery on this bed, I'm going to be using dominoes, or I should say a combination of dominoes and connectors, but we'll get more into that here in a minute. This group of parts, that is the safety rails, are all going to be permanently attached together. So here all I'm doing is plunging my dominoes as I would normally. Now for the majority of this project, I'm going to be using 8x40mm dominoes since they're pretty beefy and plenty strong to hold this bed up as well as my 40-pound son. Granted, when all is said and done, this bed should hold up about 200 pounds pretty safely. Anything more than that, and I think you need to upgrade to something like the DF700. But for this project, the 500's fine. Yeah, floating tenons are pretty damn strong. So with my safety rails complete, the next step was to mark out the joinery on the legs for the head and foot areas of the frame. Now this took me a few hours, so I'm not going to dive into all the details, but what I like to do is mark it all out on one beam first, and then transfer those marks onto the other beams. This way I can lay out all my measurements once, and then use that beam as my master template. Then from there, I can plunge all the mortises. Now in this section, there's 3 different mortise depths, as well as a couple different heights. And that's because for this bed, I'm going to be using Festool Connectors to create a knockdown piece of furniture. And you can think about those connectors as kind of IKEA furniture on steroids. But what they allow me to do is to break the piece down into multiple sections, meaning I'll actually be able to carry this bed through the house to be able to put it into my son's bedroom. If we glued it up as one bed at this point, there's no way it'd fit through the hallway, and we'd be left with a piece of furniture that would be stuck in the shop forever. But thanks to the connector system, we don't have to worry about that. Whew, that was a close one. So to install the connectors, I first need to use this little jig that comes with the kit. And basically all it is a drill guide for the connector system. This is why it was really important in that previous step to pay attention to the plunge depth, because the mortises on this side of the board need to be set back far enough that you can plunge this hole to receive the connector component. And then from there I can gather enough connector components to assemble all my joints. Now I will say that this kit is kind of pricey, but if you take into consideration the amount of times that you can use this kit, I think over time it really pays for itself. And honestly, if you include the price into this project alone, then all the materials, including the lumber, are still well below what you could purchase a loft bed for. So if you're someone like me that tends to build a lot of large furniture that you might want to take apart one day, I think it makes a lot of sense. just like when I worked for that landscaper collecting leaves. I was raking it in. So with all the connectors in place, I could get to the first dry assembly. And as you can see here, the connectors work in combination with the standard domino. All the connectors do is just pull that joint super tight. The extra domino will help support the weight as well as help with alignment. Now, if you don't own a domino and you want to attempt a build like this, you could also do this with dowels. But in place of the domino connectors, you could use something like barrel nuts to make it a knockdown piece. So with our two sides together, the next step was to lay out the joints for our safety rails. Now again here, I'm going to be using domino connectors because I want these to be removable. It was a little tricky finding the distance to plunge these dominoes to make sure the rail set flush against the board below it, but after a little layout and a couple test pieces, I got everything dialed in. Then from there, we just follow the same steps as before, where we plunge all of our mortises, being sure to keep an eye on those different depths and distances. Again here, I'll use 2 connectors and 1 standard domino to keep things aligned. And while I finish plunging those, let me take a quick second to say that if you're enjoying this video, you should subscribe. I put out new videos about woodworking tips, tricks, and projects all the time, so subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Alright, back to the build. So with my last component hole bored out, I could pop in some of those connectors and put everything back together. Now one thing I did figure out throughout this whole process was that getting these back out of the holes once they're in place is kind of a pain. You can do it with some needle nose pliers, but you just got to be really careful not to mess up your project. And the adjoining cam piece is way more difficult to get out. I had an issue during assembly that snapped off one of the pieces, and in order to remove it, I just had to drill out the hole. Obviously doing that destroys the connector, but it was better than having it stuck in place. So with the head and foot sides all worked out, I could go ahead and start working on the front and rear sides. And to do that, I'm just going to follow that same process as before, where I take one beam and lay out all of my marks, and then transfer those marks to all my others. And then from there, I can just plunge all my mortises as normal. Since these two sides are going to be glued together permanently, I'm just using the 8x40 dominoes here again. The only thing I really had to be mindful of on this portion was to make sure that I was plunging the domino joinery in the correct leg, which is why I always mark the orientation of my legs on the top of the workpiece. This way there's less of a chance of me getting confused as to what leg goes where. So with all those precautions in place, the rear side came together flawlessly. Looking good. Next up, it was time to lay out the joinery on my ladder leg. So what I'm doing here is marking out that support beam so that I can cut out my massive dado joint here in a minute. And once I had that all marked out, I could take off that front right leg and bring both the ladder leg and front right leg over to my bench. From there, I could lay out the rungs of the ladder. Now to give these a little bit more support, I'm going to be using 10x50mm dominoes for these rungs. So once I have the center marking for all my rungs laid out, I can go ahead and use a rule and then mark out 10mm off of that. This way when I place the base of the domino cutter on that line, it'll give me a domino dead center of my marking. Smooth. Then from there I can go ahead and plunge all the dominoes into my rungs. Here I'm just looking to center them into the center of the workpiece. This way we have nice centered rungs and everything's nice and even. Then from there we can give the ladder a quick test. And yeah, it's great. I really think this ladder is strong enough to hold 2 people with no problems. If only I could find 2 people with no problems. So next I can pop my dado stack into my table saw. I'll use this to clear out the majority of the material for that dado joint. Now, this dado joint is gargantuan. So what I'm going to do is clamp my workpiece to the miter gauge and use that instead of a sled. This way I can maximize the height of the saw blade and I'll have less material to remove by hand. Now, anytime you're using a dado stack that's this high, it's always a little bit worrisome. So my best advice for this process is just to hold on tight to your workpiece. As long as you know that everything's clamped well to your miter gauge, the workpiece isn't going to go anywhere. And all that's left to do at that point is just push the workpiece through the blade. So with the majority of material removed, I can bring the workpiece back over to the bench. And then from there I can just use the workpiece to mark out the final width of the dado joint. Now I kept this joint undersized over at the table saw so that I had plenty of room to use my chisels to sneak up on that final fit. You can really think about this final fit in the same way that you would a mortise and tenon joint. And that what I'm going to do first is just to establish a shoulder all the way around the perimeter of my joint. This way I can reinforce that marking line and give my chisels something to reference against. From there, I just use my chisel and work my way around one side first, and then flip my workpiece over and work my way till I meet in the middle. Now because I'm cutting across the grain, the inside of the joint may not be the prettiest, but as long as it's flat and it's tight against that horizontal piece, we're in business. Now the last step before our final fit was just to plane down those saw marks that we still had on our horizontal support. And once those were all cleaned up, our horizontal piece was to its final dimension, and we could drop it in place. Oof. So satisfying. Next up, we could lay out the joinery for that front safety rail. Now, unlike our other safety rails, this one's going to be offset on the front slightly. So to find the placement for the joint, I just marked out the height on the side of my workpiece, then took the measurement and divided by 2. This will allow me to put 2 dominoes in that edge and secure that front safety rail to the side of the ladder. One thing I find really fun about a piece like this is just watching all the parts come together. As each part gets added to the structure, the rigidity just increases more and more. So at the start of the project, where there was just 2 sides, there was a little bit of racking. And as we added more and more parts, the racking decreased more and more, which is always a really good feeling, especially when you're building something for a child. So next on the Gantt chart was to go ahead and plane down all of those edges. And all these pieces to my safety rails are slightly oversized. And since we cut those templates out, I just need to thin these out slightly so that everything matches up. The good thing is this goes pretty quickly as long as your tools are nice and sharp. The bad thing is, anytime you're planing hard maple, there's always a risk of tear out. So like they say, with great power comes great electricity bills. That is, unless you're using hand tools. But back over at this power tool, I'm going to use my oscillating spindle sander to clean up the inside of those templated pieces. This will smooth out those curves and remove any of the burn marks. And let's be honest, this is maple, so there's a lot of burn marks. The one thing I'll say is that when using this tool, make sure you don't remove too much material from the inside of your joints, otherwise you'll end up with this weird indent where the 2 joints meet. Next, it was finally time to glue something together, which felt closer to the finish line, so I was happy about it. In all honesty, these are the easiest glue ups of the whole project, but my future self knows that, and my past self doesn't. Hindsight's 2020. So once I've glued my 4 dominoes into my 2 support rails, I put a little glue onto the 2 end caps and pop them in place. Now, with the support rails being as wide as they are, the dominoes are going to allow those rails to shift slightly. So when applying clamping pressure, it was really important to make sure that I checked to make sure those rails were still sitting flat. If they weren't, I just loosened up the clamps a bit, then readjusted and reapplied clamping pressure. And I like using parallel clamps because they give me a reference to make sure those pieces are laying nice and flat. Once clamping pressure is applied, those rails will bend a bit, but that's not a big deal because at that point, the pieces are in place. Next up, it was time to address that middle rail where the desk is going to lay. And the first thing I'm going to do is just plane down both edges. This way I have a nice smooth reference for the fence. So once I have the 2 edges planed down, I can just use a French curve template to lay out the transition from my thicker down to my thinner width. And I'll copy this transition on the mid left side rail as well as the rear mid rail, which will make a lot more sense in a little bit. Then from there I can head over to the bandsaw to trim those down. Now again, at this point, we want to be super careful because we've already laid out the joinery in these pieces. So any mistake here will leave us back at square one and we'd have to recut them. So again, all I'm doing here is cutting to my line or about a 1/16 of an inch outside my line. We don't need this to be perfect because I have my pencil line to follow and we're going to clean these curves up anyway. Which leads me to this question. Do you guys prefer using templates or no templates when you're woodworking? I know that some people are really against using templates in woodworking, while other people really love them. So I just wondered what your thoughts were. Let me know down in the comments. If you're for templates, say yes templates. If you're not for templates, say no templates. And if you start your comment with yes or no templates, I'll be sure to reply to you guys first because as always, I know you're paying attention. Alright, so with my template list curves all smoothed out, I can take my hand planes to those bandsaw marks and go to town. Here I'm not going for any specific dimension, I just want things to be flat and super smooth. And when I'm working on a piece like this, I do tend to hop from one hand plane to the next. It really just depends on how that grain is treating me, whether there's a lot of tear out or there's a really deep groove that needs to be removed. I like having multiple hand planes set up for multiple types of cuts. And if you're finding it difficult to find that sweet spot with one hand plane, you can then just try it with the next. Sometimes the grain on one board will act completely different from the grain on the previous. So for me, I just test them out until I get the best result. What I will say is that lower angle planes tend to work better for me on maple. Either way, when you get done, you'll probably say something like, that was a lot of work. Next, I took a little time to glue in all the dominoes into the ends of my boards. And I chose to glue them into the ends of the boards rather than the legs, for instance, because if they're in the ends of the boards, I can still do my edge treatments, whereas if they were protruding from the legs, I couldn't. And then from there, I could fill any knots using some CA glue. I did inspect these boards to make sure there wasn't any knots that were going to impact this structurally, but there are a couple that need to be filled in. And the final step before we do that edge treatment was just to give everything a quick sanding. At this point, I'm just aiming for everything to be at 150, so that everything is nice and smooth and we don't have any odd bumps protruding that might impact the edge treatment. So with my 1/4 inch roundover bit installed at my router table, I could get to work. Now, this was going to be a lot of work because there's a ton of pieces, so every edge needed to be rounded over. I did mark off a couple of joints that we wanted to keep flat because they're going to meet up with other joints. We don't want that roundover to interfere with that connection. And when I'm routing pieces like this, I kind of try to visualize where they're going to live on the project, just in case I miss one when I'm marking everything out. Then from there, I can plunge all the mortises into my slat support piece. I'm going to be using dominoes to hold all my slats in place, so this strip just connects to the outside support and holds them all in place. And once all those were plunged, I could go ahead and connect it to my outside support. And for that, I'm just going to use some glue and screws. Now when connecting a long strip like this, I find it best to add some glue and then tack it in place with a pen nailer. This way the strip doesn't wiggle around when I'm trying to attach it with screws. From there I can go ahead and pre-drill all my holes, making sure that I countersink them, but not so much that they're going to penetrate through to the other side of the panel, because at this point, that would really suck. Kind of like petting a duckling, it would make me feel a little down. Alright, so the next step was to go ahead and glue up my ladder. Now this part of the process was kind of straightforward in that I just needed to put some glue in my mortises and then pop in my rungs. Then I could just use a couple parallel clamps to squeeze everything nice and tight. Alright, now we're good. Next up was the first daunting glue up, which was the ladder side. And it was only daunting because that ladder leg was so flimsy at this point, and I definitely didn't want to break that dado joint. Once I add glue and squeeze everything together, it's going to create a ton of strength which will hold that joint in place, but until then, it was a breaking risk. So with all that said, this part was kind of stressful. So with the front and rear sides all glued together, I could go ahead and attach that front safety rail. And to do that, I'm going to use those dominoes we plunged earlier, then apply some glue to those vertical parts, and then again attach those with some screws. Now I did glue in one more block, as you can see here, that wraps around the back of the support for the mattress, just to give the top of the ladder some more strength, but also leave a gap so that I can add and remove those slats. And speaking of the slats, it was time to go ahead and cut those out. And to create my slats, I'm just going to use some maple ply that I have left over from a couple other projects. A, I think plywood's great due to the fact that it's laminated sheets, and it'll add a little bit more strength to those slats, and B, I think it's a more cost-effective way to deal with the slats. Plus I'm using maple ply for the top of the desk, so I just trim all that out at the same time here. And then I can go ahead and plunge mortises into the center of each of the slats. And though I don't show it, I did glue those dominoes directly into the slats, this way I don't have to worry about them creeping up whenever there's someone laying on the bed. And with the slats all done, we could finally do our first dry assembly. And since we're ready to test out our mattress, I think it's the perfect time to introduce today's sponsor, SweetNight. Right out of the box, I could tell this was a high quality mattress. The first step after grabbing the package off my porch was letting the mattress expand. And check out that checker design. It would be perfect for my son's Mario themed bedroom if we didn't have to add sheets and a blanket. But the next thing to do was to check the fit on the frame. One of the big things I was looking for in a mattress was something that my client, or my 6-year-old son rather, would not be able to bounce on. So not only is the high density foam great for that, but this mattress also has a gel-infused comfort layer for cooler sleep. I've had a name brand competitor mattress for almost 10 years, and one of my biggest complaints is how hot I sleep. And after giving this mattress a test drive, I can definitely tell you that it sleeps cooler. And speaking of cool, another cool feature is the 4 firmness options in one mattress. All you have to do is rotate the mattress and feel which zone you like best. I enjoy the medium firm and my son enjoys the medium soft. These different firmness options also allow the bed to contour to your body. And let me tell you, after being on my feet all day in the shop, this mattress was perfect. So check out the link below along with the discount code to grab your own. Alright, let's finish up this desk. So now that I have the bed assembled in my living room, I can go ahead and take the final measurements for my desktop. Obviously I had an idea for what the desk size was going to be, but seeing it all assembled really helps me flesh out the final dimensions. So I first cut that down over at the table saw, and then from there I can mark out the notch that's going to allow for this desk to wrap around the back left leg. Next I took the desktop over to the bandsaw and trimmed out the notch. Now the cool thing about this desktop is that it's going to attach to the side and rear middle rails, which means it's actually going to add some structure to the design. So once I had the notch cut out of the panel, I could head back over to the bench and plunge in my mortises for the desk leg assembly. This will attach the desk leg and rail to the rear middle support. So on the back side of the rail, I'll again use Festool Connectors to make sure we can remove that. Now because the rail of the desk is going to be offset from that front leg, I had to go ahead and laminate another piece in there to flush it up. This is so the desk drawer slides will work correctly. If we didn't do this, that right drawer slide would bang into the front leg and we wouldn't be able to open the drawer. Next I could round over those front edges of the desktop. And I'll mark out those roundovers just using my template for the vertical safety rails. This way everything feels cohesive. Then from there I can just use my jigsaw to rough out that curve and then smooth it out with the random orbit sander. If I was really concerned about nailing it, I would just use this template to make another router template so that I could round these corners over perfectly. But honestly, I think I'll get close enough this way that you won't even know the difference. Yep, that looks good. Alright, so the next step was to apply some edge banding around the outside of the desktop. And while I do that, let me take a quick second to say that if you're enjoying these videos and you want to support the channel, I'd like to invite you to join my Patreon. There you'll get discount codes on plans and merch, and invites to the Discord server where I host monthly live chats, plus the message boards are pretty active, so you might learn something along the way. In any case, if you're interested, check out the link down in the description. And to those who've already joined, thank you guys so much for your continued support. It means the world. Alright, so with the edge banding attached, I could go ahead and trim off the excess using a chisel. From there, just use a router with a flush trim bit to flush everything up. Then from there, I can just use my random orbit sander to smooth out the rest of the edges. Just be careful, as I've said before, about sanding plywood veneer, because obviously you don't want to go through it. Then from there, we can build our drawer box. And again here, I'm going to use some 1/2-inch pre-finished plywood that I have left over from the sideboard build. Now, I'm not going to go into all the details about building this drawer box because I've done that a ton on the channel, but basically what I'm doing here is just quickly trimming out the front, back, and sides of my drawer box. Then from there, I'll trim out the bottom panel, cut some rabbets on the ends of my drawer sides, and then cut in a groove for the drawer bottom. And then from there, I can head back over to the assembly table, apply some glue, and then clamp everything together. Now, the cool thing about building drawer boxes with rabbets is that it holds everything nice and square, so I don't have to worry about anything being shifted. It also allows me to build the drawer boxes without any pin nails, and I think it makes the whole process pretty painless. Unlike Humpty Dumpty, who had a great fall, but his summer wasn't bad either. Once the glue had dried, I could pop them out of clamps and then attach the drawer slides to the sides. And these slides are pretty cool because they're full extension and soft close, so if you want to check them out, I'll leave a link down in the description. From there, all that was left was to leave my mark, plus I wrote a little message to my son that he'll discover at some point in the future, and then we could get on to finish. Now, I decided to finish this piece with a water-based top coat, and I'm going to use my sprayer to apply it. I do love the look of oils, that's actually my favorite types of finishes, but with this bed there was so many parts and pieces, I felt like spraying it out was the best solution. So after I applied the first coat, I waited about an hour, then sanded everything down with 220 and applied a second coat. From there, just quickly sand everything again with 220 to knock down those fibers, and the finish is done. Alright, we're on the home stretch. So the last steps were to attach those drawer slides to the side of the rails, and then from there I could attach the drawer front to the front of the drawer box. And I did this in the shop so that I could keep everything nice and flat with assembly, knowing that when I put this together in my son's bedroom, everything would line up perfectly. So once I had the frame in his bedroom, I went ahead and attached the desktop using some figure-8 fasteners. Now I had to put these together at this point because if I did it earlier, I wouldn't be able to take this apart and reassemble anything. From there I could go ahead and reinstall all my connection hardware and pop in the slats. From there, all that was left was to show my client and you guys how it turned out. I think that face says it all. My son was more than thrilled about this build, and it always makes me happy to be able to share my passion with him. So now that he's reached his lofty peak, let's take a look at the rest of the piece. I really love how the ladder so seamlessly integrates into the frame. And to that same point, the way the safety rails add some contrast with those curves, while at the same time fitting in perfectly. I also love how elegant and simple the overall design is. And let's not forget this little desk at the bottom. It finally gives a place for my son to sit and do some work in his room, plus it's a cool addition to the bed itself. And I really love how the transitions turned out from the desk to the bed frame. It's really a combination of all those little touches that bring this piece together. And of course, with the bed being up in the air, it opens up the room for so many more activities. So if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it, check out this video over here next. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and as always, I knew this would work, and I'll see you next time.